humpback whale, 40 tons of mystery. An inscrutable ocean traveller for 60 million years. The stuff of legend and myth. Even today, the human race knows little of the humpback whale. But for 25 years, researcher Dr. Jim Darling has been pulling back the humpback's veil of secrecy. It's the key to the whale's future. The more we know about humpbacks, the more fascinated we become, and the greater is our own personal stake in their survival. The humpback whale is the nomad of the sea. They regularly migrate up to 5,000 miles across the world's oceans, from the pole to the subtropics and back again, a never-ending cycle of life that's gone on for millions of years.
Whales have been, for a long time, I guess, very mysterious. I mean, they've been something which people until recently, or relatively recently, have mostly existed in people's imaginations. I mean, it's something which you read about and you imagine what they're like. And lately, it's been the last 20 years since this sort of, I don't know, one fellow called it sort of a, almost a renaissance in research and how we're looking at whales. I think we're beginning to sort of understand what the real animal.
Once 200,000 humpbacks roamed the oceans of the world, from the poles to the equator, relentlessly hunted almost to extinction. But then the cry went up, "Save the whales!" The first great global conservation rallying call that replaced the whalers' chilling chant, "There she blows."
I don't know, maybe if we can get on the sort of shipwreck.
Dr. Jim Darling is a marine biologist who spends much of his winter on the waters around Hawaii studying the humpback whale. In the past, whale research was a frustrating occupation. The humpback spends only a fraction of its life at the surface when it comes up for air. These were creatures of mystery, and when Jim Darling first became interested in whales in the early 70s, that was the problem.
Another blower there. Those whales all over the place, just can't do anything. I was living and spending a lot of time on the west coast of Vancouver Island, spending a lot of time on the beaches and in the water, surfing and so on, and running a charter boat in the area, or driving a charter boat. And we kept on running into whales. We'd see them just outside the surf break, and eventually I started looking into trying to look up some information on the animals just so as I could answer people's questions, and found that we really didn't know very much.
It's hard to realize that only a generation ago, whales had hardly ever been photographed in their natural environment. Dr. Darling was one of the first whale researchers to set about studying whales in the wild.
One of them's a little closer, I think.
Yeah, one of them's pretty loud.
Sure.
He's even louder.
It's incredible.
He's
really close. I mean, pretty much right under the boat.
Right through the late 60s and even into the early 70s, it was generally considered that you couldn't study whales, live whales at sea. I mean, the standard method for studying whales was to go out and either on a whaling ship and look at a series of corpses, or actually kill whales for the purpose of research.
But now, thanks to Jim Darling and a new generation of researchers, we're slowly putting together a picture of the whale's life.
Humpback whales are what we would call medium-sized baleen whales. They range from maybe 30 to 40 feet long. Often people talk in terms of humpbacks weighing approximately a ton a foot, so that's a 30 to 40 foot long whale. It weighs 30 to 40 tons. Humpback whales are different than all the other whales and are immediately recognizable by their very long, often white or partially white pectoral fins or flippers, which extend, anywhere 10 to 15 feet from the sides of the whale. And these animals literally, if you see them from the air, pretty much fly through the water.
All whales are mammals. That means they're warm-blooded and they nourish their young with milk. On the surface, the animal breathes air through its blowholes, the equivalent of 3,000 human breaths in one single second. It exhales in half that time, the air blown out at 300 miles an hour. The humpback's underwater world is filled with an amazing variety of sound, sharing its domain with many other species of whales, dolphins, and porpoises, each with their own particular call.
Sound is unquestionably the most important sense to all whales, and humpbacks would be included. They use it, firstly, I guess, to communicate with each other. With the visibility in the ocean being so poor, I mean, you really can't see each whale. You certainly can't expect to see your neighboring whale, so sound is critical in that sense.
Recently, the U.S. Navy opened up their underwater listening stations in the Atlantic to a few whale biologists, and for the first time, there was actual proof of this sort of suggestion, which has been around for a long time, that these whales can broadcast their sounds over hundreds, if not thousands of miles, and with that information, everybody has to start speculating as to why.
In the north, the shadows start to lengthen on the Pacific bays of Alaska. The water starts to chill. Fall is quickly approaching. The humpback, sleek and well-fed from a summer's feasting, are about to begin their annual 2,500-mile trip south for the winter.
In winter, humpback whales migrate from their northern feeding grounds down to subtropical calving and breeding areas. There are 3 in the North Pacific that we know of, or at least 3 main areas, one off Mexico, one around the Hawaiian Islands, and one in southern Japan.
Why the humpbacks choose these specific locations isn't clear, but every year they return like clockwork. They're attracted by the warmth of these safe subtropical waters, and here have only one thing on their mind: the procreation of the species. In humpback society, several males vie for the right to mate. A female, still with a calf in tow, is wooed by a dominant male. His intention is to hang on to his beloved at all costs, and that could mean war. Because out there in the vast blue yonder are a lot of testosterone-charged males who have their own ideas.
There are generally a number of males competing for access to a female. So when a female comes into estrus here, generally she moves around the channel and collects up males following her. And you'll see her sort of travel over large distances and collect maybe 8, 10, 12, or 15 males behind her. And each of these males will sort of compete for access to her. In other words, they'll fight over access to the female. And these fights can get to be fairly spectacular, with the whales rushing around and charging each other and splashing and snorting and blowing bubble streams and so on.
And the presumption is that the strongest male is the winner. Once pregnant, the humpback's gestation period is about 1 year. Normally, the calves will be born every 2 or 3 years into calm, warm waters. Newborns tip the scales at anything from 1 to 2 tons and are immediately hoisted to the surface to get their first breath of life. Mother's milk, with its whopping 40% fat content, is on tap at all times. While Junior thrives, Mother loses up to 10 tons in weight. It's enough to make a mother jump for joy.
Humpbacks often been described as the most acrobatic of whales. What that means is a lot of surface behavior, whether it be breaches or tail lobbing or flipper slaps and just any combination of those. And these behavior patterns are used in a variety of different contexts. Sometimes it seems the whales are jumping or breaching just out of exuberance. Other times it seems to occur perhaps after there's been one of these competitions for a female, and a whale which has lost that competition moves off and jumps a few times.
The humpback's acrobatic antics have spawned a whole new industry of whale watching. The humpbacks like to play a strange yet charming game of peekaboo called spy hopping. But sometimes it's difficult to tell who's watching who. But deep below the surface of the ocean, something stranger is going on. This is the legendary call of the humpback whale, a siren song that in times long gone was said to lure helpless sailors to their deaths. Jim Darling and Karen Miller are hot on the trail of a humpback singer. Like Captain Ahab's obsession with the great white whale, researchers today are still under the spell of the humpback's wistful song.
Singers are generally lone whales, and what we do is simply go out into the channel and listen with a hydrophone. So whenever you put them down, you can hear some humpbacks. The trick is to home in on a single singer, and sometimes you get lucky and it happens quite quickly. Other times it takes a number of hours where you simply travel around, to different locations, listen, and when it gets louder, you're heading in the right, heading for the right place. And eventually you find those lone whales which are doing the singing and can start the day's work.
Specifically, we're here now to look at the behavior of singing whales, even more so the behavior of whales which interact with the singers. And so when we have a singing whale out there, we know it's a lone male, sings away out in the channels here. Eventually another whale will come and join it and interact with it. And so we're primarily looking at those joiners, as we call them.
The joiners could have answered from hundreds of miles away, yet they're always males. So this is no Lonely Hearts Club mating call.
Probably all singing.
This isn't a chorus, it's a duet.
The humpback has no vocal cords, and yet it sings one of the longest and most complex songs of any mammal. And all over the North Pacific Ocean, the humpbacks are singing exactly the same refrain.
What's going on here? He shifted to another scene, I think. The song is made up of a series of themes, and each theme contains a series of phrases, and each phrase is made up of what they call elements, which is simply a single sound. Like a whoomp is one element, and then a whoomp, whoomp, whoomp would be a phrase. That phrase would then be repeated several times into a theme. And just repeat this sort of song over and over and over again for what can be hours and hours.
Maybe it's starting to change now.
What I believe it is, it's essentially a secondary sexual characteristic of male whales, and it's a display of their dominance. If we needed something to compare it to on land, it could well be like the antlers of deer. So that's a visual display of who I am if I'm a male.
Each of the three main breeding groups has its own favorite summer feeding range around the Pacific Rim, from Canada's west coast by way of Alaska all the way to northern Japan. And as the whales go north, so does Jim Darling.
You got to be with the whales, and the whales move, and if they move, you move too. The nice thing about humpbacks is they move from one remarkable location to another.
Every summer, he returns to his base on the Pacific coast of Vancouver Island, where he studies whale populations on their northern feeding frenzy. For 6 months, over the winter in Hawaii, the humpbacks haven't had a square meal. They've been living off their accumulated reserves of fat, but now their 6-inch layer of blubber is running low, and hunger is driving the whales' spring migration north.
Food is what directs the whale's life, and the only reason the whales are in this area is because of the food. And anything which happens to that food supply is obviously going to have consequences for the whales.
But long hours of daylight help make these cool waters of the North Pacific some of the most productive on Earth. There are shoals of small herring, as well as krill, so dense that the water becomes a veritable fish soup. Humpbacks have cavernous mouths and feed by scooping up to 4 tons of this nutritious broth at a time. Their throat expands like an accordion, and then they squeeze out the water through a sieve-like mustache called the baleen and swallow the pickings. And yet, for evolution at its most fascinating, you can't beat the way the whales catch their dinner. Together they make a slow circle underwater, releasing air from their blowholes. It works as a noisy bubble net, disorienting the fish while the wise old humpbacks blast through the bubbles, lunging with their monster mouths wide open. The whale's strategy is successful. They'll eat up to a ton of herring and krill a day. And in the course of a summer feeding season with a rich seafood diet, the adult whales can put on up to 20 tons of blubber. One can only wonder at their blood cholesterol level. And then it's time to hit the road again, back to Hawaii, to complete the annual cycle of comings and goings. But how they get there and back, 2,500 miles across an uncharted ocean, is still a navigational mystery that the humpback shares with many other species. But get there they do, a fact confirmed by a whale identification system that operates the length and breadth of the Pacific Ocean.
Oh, there is one just a little closer. He's close. Gone quiet?
It's getting quieter.
Yeah, he could be coming up now, maybe.
There he
There he
is.
is, right behind us.
And we're at a stage now where when you look at a whale, you quickly look to see which individual it is rather than what animal it is, because there are vast catalogs of photo IDs of different whales.
In 1979, we found the first of now what's quite a series of matches based on photo identification.
With over 300 whale shots, Jim Darling set out for southeast Alaska, where he compared notes with another humpback researcher. At that time, no one ever thought that whales migrated between Alaska and Hawaii.
Amazingly, the third whale we looked at was a whale that both he had identified in southeast Alaska and I had identified in Maui. And as we went through the afternoon, we just found whale after whale. And by the end of that afternoon, we just basically tossed out everything we thought we knew about humpback migrations in the North Pacific and sort of started again. It was an incredibly exciting time.
The thrill of discovery has never left him, and now Detective Jim Darling is hot on the trail of another humpback.
Two whales I told you about.
Okay.
Got them both in BC. They're both bubble knitting. I'd really like to know.
So let's pick some patterns and get them into the computer and see if we have these guys.
At the National Marine Mammal Lab in Seattle, Jim is looking through the photo ID files of what amounts to an Interpol sighting service from around the Pacific Rim. Tail markings can be quickly matched on the computer, and with a positive match, the file on the whale's movements grows.
Over here,
Another one here.
another one over on that side. It said it selected 72 records in 5.39 seconds. Okay, this is the first one that it brings up. So basically what this has done is gone through 20,800 photos and picked up 72 for us to look at.
Today there's disappointment, but at least there's one more humpback on the block that the world didn't know about. For a species that in 1966 had been reduced by the whaler's harpoon in the North Pacific Ocean to a mere 1,000 animals, that's wonderful news. Since time immemorial, the secretive humpback whale has been plying the oceans of the world, enchanting Homo sapiens with its mystical call of the deep. And yet the whaler's greed, allied to public disinterest, almost allowed these animals to be slaughtered to the point of no return.
essentially populations were found by whalers. They were hunted until they were completely gone, and then the whalers moved on. Whaling continued right up until 1967, 68, and then the humpbacks were protected globally. And at that point, there were really very few left. I mean, for the most part, whalers couldn't find them anyway. Probably what turned the tables was the time, really, or the point where Greenpeace was able to get out and find the whaling fleet and managed to put themselves between the harpoons and the whales, and at the same time film it. From that initial beginning, I think a variety of groups and populations of people around the world decided it was a very good thing to try to protect the whale populations which were left, or the remnants.
Not surprisingly, Save the Whale became the cry. 19 out of every 20 humpback whales around the globe had met a very bloody end. But in the last 30 years, humpback numbers have shown some recovery. It's still officially endangered, supposedly protected, but still out there on the oceans, some humpbacks are being illegally killed.
Well, recently, researchers, sort of in partnership with various advocacy groups, have gone into Japan and simply bought whale products sort of off the shelves in various grocery stores and so on, and have been able to analyze the DNA to determine exactly what species the whale meat comes from. They found that some of the meat is coming from endangered, protected species of whales.
In 1986, the International Whaling Commission declared a moratorium on all whaling. But Japan, Norway, and Iceland are still abroad on the high seas, killing whales under the guise of research. But now the picture is brighter. More and more, the whale has become the very darling of the masses.
The reality of the whale is almost more fascinating than the fiction. Whales have definitely captured people's imaginations, and then you sort of wonder, you sort of wait for it to, the downslope of this, that we will go on to something else, and it certainly hasn't occurred. If anything, it just increases each year. I mean, more and more people seem to be interested in these whale watching cruises and all the rest of it. It's just each year they're more busy, and there's more people going out, more whale watching and so on. That can't be bad. I mean, getting to know these animals and feeling close to them, and having a, sort of our society sort of embrace these creatures has got to be good, or at least I hope it is.
At least today, whales are in the limelight. Thanks to researchers like Dr. Jim Darling, the world knows of their beauty and their majesty. But to ensure the humpback's survival for all time, it's important to keep it that way.